The Demon King is a great evil that has plagued humanity since ancient times, inflicting unimaginable suffering with every appearance. The only reason humanity still exists is because the Demon King has been defeated every time by a figure known as the Great Hero. This time was no different. The Great Hero defeated the Demon King. Then, the Demon King said it was absurd, wondering how he had been defeated. But the Great Hero asked if it was really that strange. The Great Hero this time was this young man, Leon. There were many reports throughout history of the Great Hero defeating the Demon King, but the Demon King admitted that he could not deny that his ancestors had been defeated by great heroes. He always thought he could arrive on time, but together they defeated the Demon King. And afterward, when remembering the difficult journey, he would shed a tear, praising himself for his efforts and victory. That's how it should be. That's the kind of heroic story he wanted to pass down to future generations. The Great Hero asked if he really liked this talk about the Great Hero, but the Demon King said no, that he was a king, and had only researched the great heroes of the past to defeat the current one. However, Leon noticed that the Demon King knew a lot, but it didn't matter anymore, because he had come alone, without companions. But that was because the Great Hero himself was already enough on his own. He could use both magic and sword, heal within days, and detect traps, so he ended up thinking he didn't really need companions. The Demon King grew irritated, saying that claiming not to need friends was terrible. But the Great Hero was still frozen by this situation, and soon advanced, saying he didn't care about anything, and that this was the end for the Demon King. And so the adventure ended. Soon, in a distant house, someone woke up and told him to get his butt up, asking how long he was planning to sleep. The boy stood up, wondering if it was that dream again. For some reason, this boy kept having the same strange, recurring dream. It was very difficult. He was the Great Hero, fighting against a Demon King. The boy's version of the Great Hero should have been incredible, strong enough to defeat the Demon King alone, even if it was just a dream. He wished it could be a little more realistic. Even in that world, there had been a great hero who had single-handedly defeated the Demon King. But the strongest great hero in history had actually existed 100 years ago. And in fact, the protagonist's name was also Leon. His mother, who lost her life right after giving birth, had given him this name in the hope that he would become a brave hero. And because someone was still constantly rushing him, our hero Leon ended up having to move forward alone. It was his older brother named Snail who insulted the protagonist when he realized he was taking too long. However, Leon reminded him that it was the time they had agreed on earlier. But his older brother Snail said that Leon was too slow and shouldn't keep him waiting. Leon apologized, and soon they set off on their adventure. In reality, Leon was living a pathetic life, far from that of a great hero. He was the second illegitimate son of a local noble. The legitimate child, who was the noble's son, was his older brother, and his orders were absolute. He always fought with Leon and treated him like a slave, and it seemed he planned to be even crueler. And today he went hunting with his friends and forced Leon to go along to carry their luggage. But soon the boy couldn't even defeat the monsters. When he dreamed of being the great hero, he was sure he would have been very worried about what was happening. But soon they approached Snail's friends, who apologized for the delay, saying they had to wait for Leon to get ready. Snail's friends said it was fine, since they arrived at the same time anyway. None of them could wait to take down the monsters, because they wanted to see Snail bring them down himself. They then asked where they were heading, and it was to the western forest. That left the three boys completely perplexed, asking if they would be all right, because they had heard that many monsters lived there. The adults always told them not to go to that forest, but Snail didn't care. If there were 100 monsters or less, so what? He wasn't scared. After all, he held up a real sword and showed it to his friends. They said the sword looked amazing, while Leon just watched, saying it looked wonderful too. It was the best thing in the world, because it was also once used by the great hero. The three boys asked if that was true, saying Snail never disappointed, and asked who had used that sword to defeat the Demon King. Snail explained that a long time ago, many monsters appeared in that area, and the great hero appeared and defeated them all. During that time, Snail's ancestor got along very well with the great hero. Because of that, even the great hero had been impressed by Snail's ancestor's actions, and gave him the sword as a reward for what had happened. And that was incredible with that sword. There would be no problem facing some monsters there. Leon asked if it would really be all right. While they walked through the forest, Snail easily defeated monsters, cutting them in half, smiling at the situation and showing how sharp his sword was. The three friends were impressed. Leon just observed from a distance. The furthest they had seen was just a monster, and maybe it would be fine if one showed up around the group. The sword seemed good, since Snail had borrowed it. But Snail was big and strong, and he still had his 3 friends who also hunted in great numbers. It seemed they wouldn't have to fight a monster again. Leon, on the other hand, was small, weak, and had never held a sword before. So they wouldn't let him be part of the fight, and he didn't want to either, because it was too scary. But some monsters appeared right behind Leon. It was a legion of them, terrifying the protagonist. Because of that, he realized there were too many and panicked. Then the 4 friends charged forward. Snail told them not to panic, that he would finish them all. Soon they began fighting intensely, while Leon hid in the bushes and only watched the fight from afar. Things grew tense. The monsters had the advantage in numbers, but Snail's group had greater individual strength. However, from a distance, Leon saw something he couldn't quite describe. It was a goblin king, something much larger, which left him even more terrified. The huge monster roared, scaring everyone, making them realize what they were facing. This type of monster was mid-level, and a low-level goblin couldn't withstand the roar of such a beast. Because of that, the goblins began running away in fear, while the 3 friends said they couldn't believe they were seeing this monster for the first time in their lives. Snail said not to worry with that sword. There was no way to fear an ogre. Then he charged at the monster to finish it. But the monster caught Snail's sword, frightening him. The 3 friends started running, saying they didn't want to lose their lives. Snail asked them to wait, but it was too late. Leon said it was useless, that he should try to get back home at that moment. His hair was pulled, and Leon was thrown forward. It was Snail who had done that, saying Leon should take care of the rest, because he had brought them specifically for situations like this, and that Leon should never have felt honored by anything he had done. The protagonist was left lost, staring straight at the monster, asking if this would be the end for him. Then he heard a voice in his head, saying that it was just a mere monster, and he shouldn't feel anything toward it. But it wasn't just any monster, it was a monster. Leon had never faced a goblin head-on. Soon, that same voice said that Leon had power above the Demon King. But that was just a dream, because he wasn't the great hero, he was just the illegitimate son of a small noble who couldn't even hold a sword properly. But wait, Leon wondered who he was talking to, and why all his fear had disappeared. Soon, he looked closely at a sword in front of him, grabbed it, and pointed it directly at the monster. And suddenly, his swordsmanship became perfect. He cut off the arm of that huge monster, which looked back in shock, realizing its arm had been severed, and roared in pain. But at that moment, Leon realized he had been cut, and the voice said it was just child's play. And since no one else was around, no one could do that there. The monster grew enraged and charged at the protagonist, who cut it in half. Leon thought about it, wondering how he could cut a body in half. Compared to goblins, this type of monster had a thicker body and tougher bones, and yet Leon split it in half. But then, the strongest hero appeared behind him, saying he could do more than that with just a stick. And soon, Leon remembered everything. He had once been the great hero. He had once been known as the strongest hero in history, a fact he was remembered even to this day, the legendary hero who had lived 100 years ago. And it really seemed like reincarnation. That sword had nothing special about it, and it seemed he had really glimpsed something from Leon's past life. Then he looked ahead, stopping to think, and felt that he had already been in that area in his previous life. He was quite sure he had specifically appeared there because of a request to eliminate some monsters. Previously, the son of the major in charge at the meeting said he would be very happy to receive something, so he was given a sword so that he would not need anything else. Perhaps this was the ancestor that Samuel had mentioned. However, Leon thought he was supposed to have someone to call a great hero, but he was swinging the sword so poorly that he could barely face the monsters that appeared. Leon thinks the story was not told as if it happened within the last 100 years. There were many monsters around, watching. As Leon looked on, Samuel and his friends approached, and Samuel was surprised to see that Leon was fine and asked what had happened to the monster. Leon explained what had happened, and Samuel began to laugh, saying he could not believe such a thing, and probably ignored Leon because he was simply a boy not worth killing, calling Leon lucky. But soon the protagonist handed over his sword, not placing it in his hand, but instead tossing it towards Samuel, which made the boy angry. But Leon told him to be quiet, because he was very irritating. Samuel became furious, asking if Leon couldn't be spoken to like that. However, Leon ended up giving him the monster's head, and that scared Samuel, who fell backward in fear of what was happening. His friends were frightened and immediately asked Leon how he had done such a thing. But before anything else, Leon had already gone home, being greeted by a slime named Asura. Slimes are the weakest monsters, and 2 years earlier, Leon had accidentally encountered this one outside. He healed it using some medicinal herbs, and the slime began to follow Leon everywhere. The only thing that cheered him after his hardest days was this little monster. After explaining everything he had to the slime, he realized he had a lot of things to check. Leon was quite sure he was the reincarnation of the strongest hero, but there were still questions to answer, like exactly how the hero lost his life. Thinking about it, it had never been said what happened with all the hero's achievements after defeating the Demon King. All the books that told about these deeds ended with him defeating the Demon King and then living a happy life afterward, but it was never mentioned what he did beyond that. The problem with all this was that, even though Leon had memories of his past life, he could not remember anything after the Demon King's defeat. The last memory he had was a scene that appeared countless times in his dreams, defeating the Demon King. Leon had a feeling that something happened at the exact moment he cut down the Demon King. At that moment of the king's death, a terrible curse had been placed on the great hero. Perhaps the curse was designed to end with the death of the great hero. He had been so powerful specifically because of the restrictive conditions. And beyond that, the great hero had tried to release the curse immediately, but it happened that any move he tried to make was instantly stopped. In response, he tried to take an antidote, but he was also affected by paralysis and soon became immobile. After that, he lost consciousness and, yes, died, which was rather disappointing in the end. The Demon King and the great hero ended up killing each other. Furthermore, the great hero had gained victory in terms of strength, but he had probably been the most careless. The great hero perhaps should not have confronted the Demon King alone. If he had brought companions, maybe the curse could have been set aside. Under more restrictive terms, the curse became much stronger. Without a doubt, a curse of such magnitude should only be placed on a single target. So perhaps it should start with that kind of thing. Leon first tried to find out about the abilities he still had. He was strong, but was he as strong as in his past life? Perhaps he should have defeated that monster earlier with his reincarnated body, which made him begin to think about the rest of the abilities left to him. He should take a look. So he used the observation skill and realized he could use it. The protagonist was 12 years old and his species level was only 3, while in his past life it had been 100. It was very low compared to before. However, he was a level 20 swordsman, also a strong level 20 mage, a level 20 saint, and a level 20 thief. He still had some of the jobs he had before. Jobs, as they were called if you managed to acquire one. It was as if you had been blessed by God. The magical abilities were adjusted according to your level, and occasionally certain skills and spells became easier to master because they became more effective. Furthermore, the maximum level of a job was level 20, and once you reached the maximum level, you could receive more blessings. You could only have one job at a time, and once you reached level 20, you could gain a higher rank of the same job and also select a different job of another type. In his past life, Leon had done everything to reach the highest rank in all types, and he had managed to defeat the Demon King alone in the battle that ended everything. So, basically, due to reincarnation, his species level returned to 1, while his jobs remained the same. Maybe that would have affected his abilities, but everything was already at the maximum. Even though all his skill levels were at the lowest, they had become the highest rank thanks to the large bonus the blessing gave. They were low compared to Leon's past life. One day, he had everything at the highest rank. For someone at level 3, it was inconvenient. Leon looked closely at what was in front of him, as there were still some job points. But those points were necessary to obtain jobs, and you received them as your species level increased. In his past life, he had reached species level 100 and used all the accumulated points to obtain new jobs. This meant he could not acquire a new job now, though maybe he could quickly become even stronger than he had been before. There were some classes that already had jobs tied to them. For example, the first class began at 100 points, the second class at 400, and the advanced class 3 jobs cost 2,000 points. All classes increased, but some points were needed to reach the highest class. Accidentally, if Leon placed his jobs according to his classes, he could acquire 4 types: the swordsman type, the thief type, the mage type, and the healer type. If the species level reached the maximum, which was 100, it meant there was also a limit to the number of jobs you could have. The number of points received depended individually, but generally you received 5 points per level. In any case, Leon had received 100 points every time he leveled up in the past, and in this situation, he had 300 points, which meant he could still receive this bonus. There were still some jobs called extras, which appeared like a talent tree depending on the type. Once you combined both swordsman and mage, you could unlock the magic swordsman at class 2. And once you maxed out knight and priest, you unlocked the paladin. And once you maxed out mage and healer, you unlocked the magic healer. Leon could have become a magic swordsman, or even a magic healer in his past life. However, that had required exactly 10,000 points to acquire 4 types of jobs. Since he had nothing left now, he could not acquire these extra jobs. In any case, if Leon could once again accumulate 10,000 points, it might be possible for him to obtain the jobs he had in his past life. But Leon didn't know what to do. Once you acquired a job, it could not be reset to start over, so he would have to think carefully about this. Perhaps Leon should go to the church to reflect a bit on the situation, where he could obtain a job and carefully check the options available to him. You could only go and obtain jobs at the church because it required a special ability that only priests had. Soon, Leon told his slime that he was leaving for a moment, and the monster agreed. When he was leaving the house, Leon ended up meeting Samuel, who asked what was going on, saying that Leon should not go home without his permission. Annoyed, Leon said that with Samuel's big mouth, he had no choice but to listen to his voice. Samuel grew irritated, realizing he had been somewhat provoked. Samuel then charged at him, saying that Leon had been awful since earlier. But when Samuel was about to throw a punch, Leon noticed he was too slow, and truly he didn't need an excuse at that moment. Leon saw a power that would reflect all the damage back onto Samuel, and that's what happened. Samuel fell to the ground because he forgot that the ability actually counterattacked with double the force. That made Leon reflect on his skill. There was still a limit to how much damage could be reflected, but basically it would counter anything below the Demon King's level. Leon had accidentally forgotten about this and felt things were calmer. He approached Samuel and asked if he was alive, but it seemed he had only fainted. At that moment, Leon thought to himself, as Samuel's nose also seemed broken. So, when he tried to cast a healing spell, Samuel's mother appeared, asking if he was all right, shouting in every way. It would be horrible for her to see this. Leon just turned his face away, but it would still be a pain. So he would just take the chance to leave, but Samuel's mother asked Leon to wait and demanded if he had done this. Leon simply said Samuel had fallen to the ground. But the lady did not accept this excuse and said she had seen since Samuel approached Leon. It was impossible that he had just fallen for no reason, and obviously Leon had done something. It was unforgivable that the protagonist had done that, and he should know he was going to be banished. At that moment, calmly, Leon said he had some things to do, so he would talk to her later. Right after, the lady was left in disbelief, and when she saw Leon leaving, she begged him to wait, but it was too late. When Leon reached the church, he asked for help from a sister nearby, because he wanted to check his skill tree. The sister took him to a room where there was a globe. Leon approached and touched it, seeing his skill tree. That crystal was a sacred object that manifested all the jobs that had been acquired in the form of a diagram. Everyone is born with a different type of skills that they cannot acquire, but there are some types of skills that can be easily learned. In his past life, Leon had access to many different kinds of skills, even from the very beginning. So, his skill tree was the same as before, and it seemed he had more active jobs than in his past life. Perhaps taking the magic healer would be the best part. An anti-hero was something much closer to what Leon should be. Or maybe he should cast another type of power. And if he mastered fighter or hunter, he could manage to create something cooler. However, he realized something. He didn't need to be strong. There was no Demon King in the present, and he was no longer an adventurer. In his past life, he had been a hero candidate when he was only 10 years old. From then on, every day was dedicated to training only to defeat the Demon King. But there had been a purpose. He was just a lone adventurer who was placed there only for power. Looking back, it really was a heavy life. However, now he had been reborn in a peaceful world, and this time he could live quietly and freely. So Leon chose the tamer job, a job that allowed the holder to persuade animals to become friendly. That would let Leon see what his little monster was thinking, since that had become very familiar to him. And since the slime had no eyes or mouth, he couldn't really understand its feelings. So he would take that job to understand monsters better. When Leon took that job, he decided to return home. Right at the entrance, there was a maid who asked Leon to go to the master's room, since he wanted to talk about the incident with Samuel. Later that day, Leon went to his father's room. There, the man asked where Leon had been. He replied that he had been at the church, and the man understood the situation, but something was strange. The air was very heavy. The man then asked if the protagonist had really hurt Samuel, and Samuel started shouting, saying it was true, that just by looking at his nose it was obvious what had happened. Worse, he took a deep breath and said again that it was true. The lady was in shock at that moment. She began shouting, saying that Leon was very violent and that he should never raise his hand against his older brother. She said Leon was the worst son, but it was obvious that the one being violent was Samuel. The lady demanded that the protagonist be expelled from the house, that he was a horrible child, and that the family name would be dragged down into the dirt because of him. But the man, worried, said he did not want to do that, since the protagonist was only 12 years old. Still, it seemed Leon's father had some intention of expelling him. Our hero's mother had been a maid on the estate, and apparently she had been so beautiful that Leon's father could not help himself. At the moment, he realized that that feeling would be terrible. But in any case, Leon didn't need sympathy. So he said he would simply leave. The lady began laughing, saying that Leon had realized he really was a problem. However, Leon's father still hadn't let him go, since he was only 12 years old. But the lady said that he already had a job at 12, so it was fine. The man ended up understanding the situation. In that case, he would move Leon to live with a merchant family and work for them. But Leon said it wasn't necessary. The man didn't understand. In fact, Leon would become an adventurer, and the man grew thoughtful about it. Adventurers served an organization called the Adventurers Guild. First, they would explore, then fight, and thus take on more missions, earning more money. Since it was possible to reach the top based only on strength and achievements, it was a popular occupation that was always present among everyone, whether poor farmers or children who had the chance to change their lives with great success. But it was a dangerous job. Unlike soldiers hired by the nobility, adventurers did not receive a stable salary. Naturally, they had to pay for equipment and necessities with their own earnings. In his past life, Leon had even cooperated with some adventurers to fight against the Demon King's army. But even though he said he had cooperated, in truth he did everything on his own. The man said Leon could not fight, but Leon replied that he would not worry. He had already taken a subtle job with combat earlier. The man grew worried, but Samuel shouted that it was impossible for Leon to do such a thing at his age. He said that even he, Samuel, was only level 8 and had never managed to take a job until now. His older brother's abilities were still something simple, but in any case, Leon would still leave the house. He would survive on his own, so there was no need to worry about him. So Leon decided to go to his room, and there the slime was talking to him. It was true that he could now hear the feelings and thoughts of the little creature. When he petted it, the creature said it tickled too, but soon after managed to settle down. Answer. He would go. The creature responded more clearly, something he had never been able to tell before. The protagonist's father appeared, talking to him. Leon stood up, asking if he needed something. Then the man handed the protagonist a bag full of money. When the protagonist asked if it was okay, the man said he had tried to be a good father and asked forgiveness for everything he had done until now. In any case, he wanted to give that to the protagonist, so he should be sure to accept it, as he wanted to make his journey much easier. Leon ended up storing the items in an item box, a magical object that could store things in another dimension. And that seemed useful, since the backpack seemed to have enough capacity to store an entire body. Maybe Leon should get a better backpack and see if he could store an entire village. The item box he had from his past life had been full of valuable items, so he began storing everything, until he realized the room was completely empty. And perhaps Leon, standing up, realized he was grateful to be reborn in this world in that form. The slime asked where Leon was going, and he said he was leaving home. But the monster grew sad and said he couldn't do that. Soon, Leon said the slime could go along with him. Then, excited for tomorrow, the man thanked Leon for the effort he had made. And if he was leaving, obviously Leon would go all out. So he left home smiling, saying that finally he was free from the life he had, and it was very peaceful to feel the fresh air around him. But thinking about the situation, Leon began walking. He realized someone was watching him. There were people observing from a distance, trying to surround him, but it was clear someone was targeting him. And it was still a group. Then, in front of him, Samuel appeared, saying that leaving like that was useless, and that now it was time to celebrate his departure, and that Leon should be grateful for it. He wanted to hang out a bit, since he realized Leon had money. He asked if their father had given him the money. It was obvious he was after the protagonist's money, and Leon immediately told him to move aside, as he was in the way. But the boys started laughing at that moment. Leon was surrounded. The protagonist said he didn't want to do this, so he refused to hand over the money. But soon Samuel grew irritated. One of Samuel's friends charged at Leon, who triggered the reflect ability, sending him crashing to the ground. Samuel didn't understand and immediately ordered them to block Leon entirely. Everyone around the protagonist charged in and got hit with the same power. There was no guarantee they could save themselves. The abilities had effects that increased the likelihood of retaliation, and that seemed very high for Leon. Nobody understood what was happening. Even though he hadn't done anything yet, he had taken down 5 people. So they decided to attack from a distance. One of the people behind Leon picked up a rock and threw it at him with all his strength, but it too was reflected, sending him crashing down. The ability worked even at a distance. People began to grow scared. Then Samuel drew a sword from his waist and said he would end it right there. Samuel demanded Leon show the job he had taken, and the protagonist grew completely irritated. He picked up a stick from the ground, showing that he would use it. Samuel asked what Leon was doing with that, and the protagonist thought he could defeat Samuel with just that stick. So the boy grew angry and charged at the protagonist. Leon realized the boy had never learned, so he would end it once and for all, to never see that face in front of him again. Then Leon simply charged at Samuel and cut his sword in half, which frightened the boy as he saw what had happened. Not understanding the situation, he fell to the ground in fear. Leon said that was the truth, but Samuel refused, saying it was impossible for such a thing to happen, and asking what kind of technique the protagonist was using to do that. Leon explained that all he had done was cut the blade in half. Then he repeated the same movement and ended up breaking the entire floor, which scared everyone even more. Then Leon threw the stick upward, cutting the forest in half. Everyone was even more shocked. Then Leon had a brilliant idea he would tell Snail the truth, that it wasn't just a stick, it was a stick from a legendary tree of the earth, whose strength was said to rival orichalcum, and only by seeing the power of that weapon could one surpass the hero's sword. But he would give it to them if they wanted, and could sell it for more than gold coins. Leon threw the stick forward, and everyone rushed to grab it. They piled on top of each other, and the one who got it in the end was Snail, who pushed through and grabbed the stick. Leon said he would move with great strength, and the stick broke. Snail didn't understand what had happened, so he decided to ask Leon which part of it was a legendary weapon, but Leon had already gone, and thus began the journey of a reincarnated adventurer. To be sure, he would take the road to the city where the Adventurers Guild was, and once he arrived there, he would meet new people and new friends. Leon went by carriage on a trip, and the carriage owner asked if Leon was planning to become an adventurer by chance, and soon the protagonist said yes. He said he liked the stories of the adventurers who were with him. The people looked at Leon closely and smiled, but one of them was Ryan, a low-ranked adventurer whose job was fighter, and the other was Nia, also a low-ranked adventurer, and she was a mage. Soon, Leon asked about their ranks, and the adventurers were surprised he hadn't been told before, but it was based on skills and everything that had been done. Adventurers received a rank from the letter F up to the letter S. Leon kept thinking and paying attention to the other rankings that had existed in the last 100 years, and maybe things had been revised. They explained that the lowest rankings were only for beginners, and the DE ranking was for those who had already established themselves, while those with the letter C rank already had experience. At their age, being ranked D meant they were quite vulnerable. Leon understood the situation. Then the girl asked Leon if becoming an adventurer at his age was a bit difficult, but soon they heard someone asking them to stop, and everyone stood up. There were two girls surrounded by a group of people adventurers being attacked by bandits, and soon Ryan began to wonder what was going on. One of those bandits stood in front of the carriage, asking if they weren't the adventurers who were always watching from afar, and that they were angry, since they were the most notorious bandit gang in that place. Everyone was startled at that moment. Leon asked if they were famous, and yes, they were known for always fighting directly in their own battles. They had heard from adventurers in the East that almost all of them had been wiped out back then. They had grown up in those places with great strength. Even high-ranking adventurers sometimes ended up suffering against them. Soon the bandits demanded that they hand over everything they had, and that they would also be taking all the women along. Ryan grew irritated, while Leon said they couldn't go easy on these people. Then he raised his hand toward the bandits and used his sandstorm power. The skill sent everyone flying except for those he wanted to spare. The adventurers wondered what had just happened, and they drew their attention to Leon, asking what kind of magic that was if it wasn't a spell combining wind and earth. Leon said that was exactly it, and thought of using something much more lethal. It seemed those bandits had also committed other crimes, so maybe he could neutralize and capture them that way. But the adventurers said that wasn't the problem, and Leon was confused. When he turned back toward the carriage to check on the girls, the other adventurers asked how he could do that without using a chant, saying it was impossible to use such a skill like that. Looking at the fallen bandits on the ground, Leon wondered what he should do with them. Should he put them on the carriage or something? The girls asked what had happened, and Leon wondered if he should carry all the bandits at once. Then, after tying them all with a rope, Leon decided to leave right then, and so he leapt with a massive jump and left that place, leaving everyone stunned. The girls didn't know what to do, and at the city gate, Leon left the bandits there when he saw a guard, who didn't understand what was going on. Leon explained he had caught some bandits along the way, and the guard asked what that meant, but Leon had already gone. Observing the city, nothing had changed much, until he noticed the Adventurers Guild. So he decided to enter and register right away, and when he went in, he saw a statue. the statue of his past life. Someone there said they wished everything was legendary, and the receptionist explained that 100 years ago, a hero saved the world and defeated the strongest demon king of all. Leon asked why that statue was in the Adventurers Guild. There were statues of that hero all across the kingdom and even across the world. After all, he had been a hero for all humanity. The Adventurers Guild in particular idealized legendary strength. In fact, there wasn't a guild without his statue. Moreover, the receptionist was infatuated with the great hero, saying he was handsome. Then she asked why Leon was there, introducing herself as the receptionist. Leon said he wanted to become an adventurer. She asked how old he was, and he said 12. The receptionist then asked if Leon already had a job, and he said yes, he had taken Tamer and introduced his slime. The girl didn't understand why she only saw that slime. Even though he was a beast tamer and seemed honest, she ended up not recommending becoming an adventurer with that job. They asked why. She explained that the job didn't have any skills particularly effective against high-level beasts, and you would need to be strong enough on your own to capture a big beast to join you. Also, that type of job wasn't meant for combat. It would be different if he already had a rank 2 job, but that was still some years away. Many people started out as tamers, but the start with that kind of job was very complicated. Leon said he had a plan to take the test anyway. He still needed to register. So they went to the reception desk to check what needed to be done. Leon had to fill out a form with his information. She asked him not to lie about anything, especially if he had committed any crimes, though at his age that was unlikely. Soon the receptionist noticed something while Leon was filling it out. He had the same name as the great hero, so she said the exam would be the next morning. Leon asked what he should expect in the exam, but it depended on the job. For a beast tamer, it would likely mean summoning a beast for the job, and he would have to fight the examiner to demonstrate his abilities. The next day, Leon came face to face with the examiner, who decided to begin. The adventurer girls Leon had saved were also there, and the examiner said the exam wouldn't be easy, that he would not let weak people pass, and of course they would likely be killed during the combat. Even with the examiner's awareness, the judgment would be harsh for everyone. Soon he pointed directly at one adventurer who panicked and said he would be first, and of course he lost. Another adventurer also lost, told to try again next time. Another admitted he wasn't ready to receive anything. The examiner said acting like that, they would all just be eaten by beasts. At that moment, the adventurers said they couldn't deal with this examiner because he was too strong, and no one expected less. He was a very strong adventurer. But Leon thought about it at that low level. Then the examiner looked closely at Leon, annoyed to see that he was just a child and also a tamer. At that moment, he mocked the protagonist's slime, which made Leon angry. Then the slime leapt at the examiner. Ricardo knew the slime wouldn't be able to do much. The adventurers mocked Leon, saying he only had a slime. That obviously he wouldn't take the exam seriously. The examiner also didn't take it seriously, asking why he had to deal with just some little monster. Maybe that was really part of the job, but the slime grew angry and charged at the examiner, which startled him, making him wonder what was wrong with that monster. After trying to cut the slime, it dodged all the attacks. At that point, the examiner grew confused, not understanding what was happening. Then he was struck directly by the slime, realizing it was very powerful. Just a single little monster was doing what no adventurer could, leaving everyone shocked. Leon wondered what was happening. He decided to check carefully what was going on, looking at the slime's stats. All its slime abilities were very high, and Leon was shocked, asking if slimes were supposed to be like that, or if maybe it was just a much higher class of slime. Thinking more, Leon remembered what the sister had told him, that a companion followed the strength of its master. Then the examiner gave up. It was impossible. He was a Class 2 adventurer with great power, and he couldn't believe he had been injured like that. Everyone was shocked to realize the examiner had lost, and Leon just observed, noting he was a veteran, and veteran adventurers should have been much stronger than that. Leon asked how it went, and the examiner ended up passing him. There was no way he could fail someone who had stood up to him like that. That said, the monster Leon had was very strong, and he was nervous to see Leon only had that one monster. He recommended Leon join a party as soon as possible. So the protagonist turned in the exam results to the guild receptionist, who was surprised he had managed to pass, seeing that even the examiner had been defeated, and still gave him a very high ranking. She couldn't believe it either, hearing the comments that he had defeated the examiner, and obviously Sura had faced him head-on. Then there was something Leon wanted to ask her if there was a triple S rank, but she said no, and that there were still some adventurers who couldn't even be measured with current equipment because they were strong enough to defeat a monster. Leon wondered about that terrifying demon, but she said it was unbelievable. Ricardo couldn't believe that was a requirement. and he asked about the ranking. The receptionist said there was nothing like that, and that to qualify you had to be able to face a disaster-level red dragon. And what kind of monster could do that? No one knew. She continued, saying that currently the highest rank was still just a single S, and that even so you had to be strong enough to defeat a disaster-level monster to qualify. There were still only a few adventurers at that rank. Leon asked why so few were at that rank, but the receptionist said she had heard that there had been higher rankings when the Demon King was still alive, and that while some were still around, the beasts had grown stronger than in the current days. Then Leon understood the situation. The immense power within the Demon King had caused the monsters to keep growing stronger, but it had been 100 years since he was defeated, and the world had become much more peaceful, and the beasts had become weaker. Perhaps the weaker beasts had made humanity weaker too, since it had become much easier to gain experience points. And that was exactly what Leon was thinking. Soon the receptionist handed him his guild card, saying he would have to pay for it as well, so he should stay calm. He also gained a beast point, and when he managed to do everything required, he would get it without problems. She was completely lost about what to do with the slime. Maybe he should put it inside his body or something like that. Leon asked if he could put it inside the slime's body, and ended up doing so. And it seemed the slime liked it, but then it moved as if adjusting only its classification. Soon after, Leon went directly to the mission board. Meanwhile, the adventurers approached Leon, asking if he wanted to take a mission with them as well. At that moment, Leon remembered who the two were, realizing they were the adventurers who had been attacked by bandits earlier. One of them introduced herself as Saria, and she was with her childhood friend Yuri. Then the two looked closely at Leon, realizing they had gone through the same test. They figured Leon had something to say, since they thought it would be a good idea for the three of them to form a group, given that he had managed to face the examiner head-on. Seeing that he was very strong, then even on his own he was good enough. The adventures seemed very difficult for Leon, but the protagonist thought that adventuring peacefully with beginner adventurers didn't seem like a bad idea, so he agreed. Since Leon was being very modest, she said it wasn't necessary, that in fact it was a relief, because the girl was a little worried about it being just the two of them, and she also wanted to make sure she had more information before joining a group. And as Leon noticed, the two were women, and had already been watched and harassed many times while they were there. Female adventurers were relatively rare, and many groups competed to recruit them. In many cases, fights even broke out after a girl joined a group. For a mission, they chose one that involved exterminating some monsters in the forest. It was a good first mission for him. Leon said he was fine with it, so they decided to go ahead. After arriving at the forest, they walked for a bit, noticing there weren't any monsters nearby, probably more deeper in the trees. But that was what the mission stated. The receptionist had told him it was to defend the forest that was full of monsters. It was a little difficult to take, since their rank technically wasn't allowed to take such missions, but the receptionist had warned them to stay away from the forest. Even though she had said that, Leon thought about the situation. They would end up going home empty-handed. So, if they didn't go into the forest, it would all be fine. Leon gave a whistle, and Saria thought he was someone made for adventuring. Soon the protagonist said they were coming. The two girls looked back to see a bunch of monsters charging toward them. Seeing all of them rushing in, the two girls thought about what to do, since there were more than 12 there. But Leon said that should be worth a gold coin for all they were seeing. Saria said it wasn't the time to think about that they should run. But Yuri said there was no point, since the monsters were too fast, and they would never be able to get away. Saria then said it was fine. They should just advance and fight. At that moment, Leon thought they were nervous since it was their first mission. So Sura decided to charge in as well. Saria and Sura held them off, while Yuri was to protect the protagonist. Everyone understood their role, and thanked each other as they charged at the monsters head-on. Sura was very strong, while Leon pushed into the monsters, and Yuri cast her magic. But at that moment, Saria let a monster slip through toward Yuri. She apologized, but Yuri said she would handle it. However, just as she was about to act, Leon stepped in front of her, and the monster lunged. The two girls shouted for him to be careful, worried about what would happen. Leon pulled out a sword, but he could handle things barehanded. He grabbed the monster by the neck and immobilized it. The monster didn't know what to think at that moment. Then Leon slammed the monster into the ground, breaking all the barriers around. The girls were terrified, while Leon thought that he was definitely far weaker than in his past life. Obviously, his level was very low too. At that moment, all the wolves charged at Leon in rage. They bit at every part of his body. At that moment, all the wolves piled onto Leon. The girls panicked, wondering what was happening, but they were only play biting. Leon then said it was his turn, and he dodged them all, tossing them away. From a distance, the girls wondered if they were dreaming, but it was real life. Maybe they were in shock. They pinched each other's cheeks to see if it was a dream, but it only hurt. After everything was over, Leon had defeated them all. He stacked the corpses one over another. The girls trembled, and Leon apologized for handling everything himself. He asked if they wanted to fight, but both said no. Then he reassured them, saying not to worry. He would be happy to share the reward with them, since they had been seeking this from the start. But the two said it wasn't a problem. Just then, they heard a roar from within the forest, perhaps a guard approaching. At that moment, someone appeared. It was an even larger wolf, probably the wolves' leader. They realized it couldn't be real. It was the wolf king of the forest. It looked at Leon and asked if he was the one who had destroyed its entire wolf army. Leon understood the beast was intelligent and could speak human language. The high rank for these wolves was the Wolf King, capable of destroying small villages or even cities alone. It would normally require mid- or high-ranked adventurers to take it down. The girls bowed, saying they couldn't deal with this. They couldn't believe they would die on their very first mission. They began crying, saying they only wanted to become great adventurers, apologizing to their mothers and fathers. At that moment, Leon said it was fine. They shouldn't worry. The two were startled, saying it was obvious this was a wolf king. At that moment, the wolf broke through the wall, saying it would avenge its army. The girls begged to be spared, but it was too late. Just as the wolf lunged at them, Leon grabbed their hands, asking if they were all right. The two froze, not knowing what to do. Leon told them they didn't need to be powerful or afraid right now. The girls insisted they should be afraid it was a wolf king, and asked why he was so calm. The wolf realized it couldn't move, and then Leon punched, shattering the entire forest and sending the wolf flying back. The wolf asked how Leon had become so powerful, while the two girls wondered if they were dreaming or simply in shock. They pinched each other's cheeks, and it hurt. So it was real. Leon had destroyed the entire forest. The two admitted he was right, but said it made no sense. They asked how Leon had become so strong, but he said it wasn't important they should worry about the wolves still standing. The girls were frightened, seeing each wolf getting back up one by one. They didn't understand what was happening. At that moment, Leon pulled out his item pouch and put them away one by one, making them disappear. The girls asked what was happening, but no one wanted to think about it at that point. Leon told them not to worry. He would share the reward with them. Soon after, they returned to the reception desk. The receptionist asked how their first mission had gone. Seeing the girl's condition, she asked if something bad had happened, but Leon said it went perfectly fine. The two, however, had lifeless eyes, while Leon didn't know how to explain what had happened. Anyway, Leon explained that he had defeated many wolves at once. The girl asked to see them. At that moment, Leon began pulling wolf after wolf from his infinite backpack. But she told him to wait, as he was about to dump them all onto the reception desk. She was in shock and told him to move them somewhere else. There were mountains of resources there. The receptionist begged him to stop and asked how many they had defeated. Leon hadn't counted, maybe 15 or more. The worst question, how many? Obviously far more than anyone could believe. It was clear how many wolves there were. It was obvious they had gone into the forest, even though they had been told not to. But Leon said they hadn't gone into the forest. The receptionist said that was impossible, since wolves hardly left it. But Leon wasn't lying, so the topic was dropped for later. For now, they had to proceed elsewhere. But anyway, they asked where he was storing all those wolves. It was his item box. The receptionist asked if Leon had something so valuable, and Leon thought every merchant had an item box. He ended up pulling out everything that was inside there, were more than 50. Leon thought it was normal, and that it was useful to fit everything into an item box, but he couldn't get one with more capacity. Because of that, he thought his item box was too weak. The receptionist asked what kind of thing that was, but item boxes were artifacts that only a small number of mages could have, and they almost never appeared on the market. Because of that, they were far more expensive, costing more than a carriage. At that moment, she looked closely at Leon. She thought she must be mistaken. Then she looked at the wolves, realizing one seemed to be a wolf king. Maybe he had defeated that. The receptionist was shocked, wondering what kind of prey Leon was hunting. The protagonist asked if something was wrong. Then the receptionist explained that the examiner had mentioned earlier that there was a slime, more impressive than it seemed. She asked the two girls if something was wrong, but they said no. So she asked if Leon had defeated all of them by himself. If all these beasts had been taken by him, and if so, then the receptionist was shocked. Only now did Leon realize he had done more than he should have. Leon asked how much they were worth, but she couldn't give him the total right away, asking if they could return the next day. So the next day, Leon returned for compensation for the previous day's materials. The bag was heavy. They asked if it was really the right amount. Leon had defeated 56 wolves, including 1 wolf king and 4 wolf guards. On top of that, he had brought them all. Obviously, it was a heavy sack, and more than that, none of them had many injuries, so the price was much higher. Normally, even a high-ranking adventurer couldn't defeat them all alone. Because of this, including Leon, all 3 were promoted to a higher rank. The 3 of them had broken the guild record for the fastest promotion, even though the 2 hadn't done anything. Soon, Leon ends up sitting at the table with the 2 to divide, but they say that they cannot accept that because they did nothing that was necessary. But then Leon ends up saying that they accepted and agreed to share things when they were accepted right from the start. So he ends up giving half to each one, telling them to take it. Since Leon was insisting, they end up taking it to deposit everything into the guild. So right after that it activates. Leon ends up waiting for his money, saying that he should get some equipment, and then thought that he could fight without that, even though there was a class that would come to his mind. Leon would still need to get some equipment, so leaving the Adventurers Guild, he decides to take a look at the street that was full of shops. There were many people happily running around him while Leon walked and saw that many people were talking. It was the most prosperous year in the last 100 years. There were many more people and also a great variety of good things to sell. Leon ends up finding a shop that catches his attention and decides to buy some things there, some gloves and new clothes. Noticing that the gloves were durable and elastic, everything should be fine, he ends up buying all of that, and the lady thanks him for everything he did. First of all, he would need impact and magic resistance and resistance as well, and also snow resistance would provide all of that perfectly, after giving all the rewards for that. Leon ends up saying that now he needs to check a new weapon, so he decides to leave, but the lady does not understand anything that had happened, and in a weapons shop, Leon ends up picking up some swords and checking that none of them seemed truly good. In fact, they all looked bad. It would not be very effective to fight with that. So, at that moment, Leon leaves the shop thinking he should go to another immediately. But he ends up hearing someone talking to the blacksmith saying that he should make a sword that the buyer wanted and was willing to pay whatever it cost. It was a girl who was there saying that it didn't matter how many times she would say that he was that kind of thing, but it was that she wanted to make a sword, and it was just her dream and she didn't care about the payment. The blacksmith gets irritated and ends up lunging at the girl, saying he wanted to finish her. But when he tries, his hair ends up being cut by the woman, who becomes even more irritated, saying that it was just for him to know that she doesn't sit calmly with people who make malicious compliments. So he leaves screaming and apologizing, and Leon just watches the woman saying that the sword thing was not that bad. Besides, it was sharper than any of the products he saw, so based on what he heard, she should be the woman who made it. So Leon calls her attention, and the girl looks closely at Sira if he says that he wanted to make a sword. And the woman does not understand what he was saying. They end up looking at each other, and the woman gets lost, asking if he, like a child, wanted to make a sword. Soon she turns her back and says she was in a terrible mood. So he should go home, but Leon ends up getting in the middle of it, and she ends up screaming, but Leon still heard the woman asking him to go home because she didn't want to make a sword for a child. Then he asks if he could ask her something first, and what kind of person she could make a sword for. They end up staring at each other carefully, but it was based on the intent to kill that she had, and obviously he was just any little boy. She introduces herself as Zeta. And besides everything, she was a blacksmith. Leon ends up introducing himself as an adventurer. She ends up being impressed to know that he is an adventurer at his age, and that he explains a lot, but to answer his question, the girl only has one rule. She only makes swords for those who have enough skill to use them, and that was all. Leon ends up understanding, and anyway asks if she has any sword with material better than mithril, like mastite for example. She gets startled, and she does not know how she could get her hands on such a rare material in the first place, and these kinds of materials are only used for legendary weapons. Not even the royal family's blacksmiths have access to this kind of material. Leon ends up wondering if that was it, and that it was not so rare in his past life. He had some weapons with these materials, in fact, and maybe he should get some for himself. The woman says that it was rare, specifically because it is not so easy to find, but then he says that maybe he should find it in the deeper parts of the dungeons. She asks if Leon is stupid because that takes a group of first-class adventurers to enter the deeper parts of the dungeons. It was not a place where one could walk easily like a park. Leon asks if that is really so, but she says there is no other choice. She was just thinking of getting more material, so she would go along with him for an adventure to get some materials, and whether or not she forged it herself, it would be worth it to make a sword. So both go to a dungeon nearby. In a cavern corridor, there were many floors inside this dungeon. The further down you go, the stronger the monsters become, and the traps become more deadly. Currently, the deepest part anyone managed to go in a dungeon was floor number 20. Anyway, floor number 20, there is a probability of identifying success while trying to get mastite. Somehow one may find something that never managed to reach floor 30 or below. Leon ends up saying that their point was to go to floor number 30. The woman gets startled, saying that it was impossible for him to reach so far. And anyway, they would only go to floor number 10, which was also a good choice. They would still find some rare materials there. Along with being a blacksmith, she was also a very skilled woman with swords, and it seems she obtained a very rare job as being a battle blacksmith. The girl believed that she would need to have enough strength to handle a sword alone in order to create swords. Besides everything, she also trained since she was a child to collect materials. And the girl could go to the burrows alone and even master her adventures to venture against other groups. Zeta managed to go alone up to floor 12. Together with the adventurers of the city, she could reach the world top. But because of that, and her masculine way of speaking and her appearance, she still had many girls who liked her. But why such a woman was like that? Right after that, they end up finding a black minotaur, a monstrous boss, and also huge worms. She was trembling very close to Leon, while she wondered why, in fact, they reached floor 30. Leon ends up defeating the monsters with ease, and says that he had previously said that they would go to floor 30 from now on. Then the slimes were managing to do everything alone, and the girl asks, how come they are now going to floor 30? Leon ends up explaining that the deeper they go, the more chance they have of finding the materials they need. The girl gets scared, wondering if they are going even deeper, and asks if he was serious because she wanted to go home at that moment. So, they continue descending the cavern. Soon she says she would be honest because seeing that he is strong, he currently needs a sword made by her. Even if a sword made in those random streets was good enough to defeat the red dragon. But Leon says that he doesn't need a sword that was made randomly because it was breaking. She had never seen a sword that could break so quickly like that. And soon Leon's sword ends up breaking. And she asks what he will do since the sword was no longer working, and asks if he wanted to use hers. But as a monster was coming towards them, Leon ends up throwing a punch that defeats the monster, saying that it would not be necessary to use her sword. The woman then asks why he wants a sword made by her. Soon after they end up reaching another path and the girl was already tired. Leon asks if she is okay, and soon she answers that yes. So maybe it was time to have a snack, so they decide to sit down to eat something calmer. The girl keeps wondering what she was doing and if they were going to eat right in the middle of that pile of floors. Leon says that it was fine, and soon she asks where he got all that from, but it was because Leon had an item box. First, he starts with the fire, with the materials he collected. Second, he heats some water in the pot, and so begins to make something with chopped vegetables. At the same time, he heats the noodles and separates the pot. That should be good. The woman asks if Leon was also a master cook, and soon he pays attention and asks if she wants some too. Obviously not. She would not eat in places like that. And Leon ends up eating, saying that it was delicious in front of her. The woman just watches while Leon asks what was happening and asks if she wants some. The girl says yes, and after eating, she says it was delicious, that she had never quickly eaten something so good inside a dungeon. So the two went to floor 33, and there Leon says that the House of Monsters of Horrors was beginning to appear. The woman asks what they should do now, if they should go back to get the other materials. But no, she had a terrible feeling about that. Leon says that this was the calmest route, and she didn't quite understand what Leon was saying at that moment. If he was crazy, it was just looking at those monsters. He says there were many but a lot of monsters that he could fight. The girl gets irritated, asking why he was acting that way, when in fact, a few monsters to him was a lot. Leon ends up getting a little irritated because she was dripping with sweat, and asks whose fault it was since he should realize that those worms were like that. And so all the monsters end up noticing them. The woman gets scared and soon asks if Leon can handle all that. Maybe if he could use magic, he could handle the entire group. The woman wonders if he can use magic too because he was absurdly strong. And then Leon ends up using his fire magic, which ends up defeating all the monsters around them. And so he ends up putting out the fire with water, and realizing that he was clearing the entire dungeon, the woman was paralyzed, wondering what she should do. Leon asks what was wrong because they should just move. Soon after, he keeps descending so much that they end up arriving inside the cavern corridor, hitting the walls on the lowest floor. The boss asks who was there to disturb his sleep, and looking closely, that irritating aura could only be from a person that the boss remembers very well, because he would never forget the humiliation that was given to him. Meanwhile, Leon just observes. Soon they start reaching the 40th floor. Leon only watches Zeta, who was completely exhausted at that moment. But he wanted to check the wall. realizing there was something there, so he decided to punch the wall to see what was inside. And soon they found the material they had been looking for. The woman said they could finally return to the surface. And at that moment, Leon said that since they were already there, maybe they should keep mining. That way they could find more on that floor. Now she was getting scared, but it was already too late. Leon had already found plenty of the material they needed. And so they soon realized they could make more than 100 swords with that much they had gathered. Right then, the woman said it was fine, and right after that they decided to go home. But Zeta said she at least needed to breathe a little, so she decided to sit down to check what was happening. Looking a bit at her skill window, Leon realized he had increased his own level a lot. Both his jobs and even his skill levels had gone up a lot, so Leon decided to look at his slime, which had also leveled up. It had gotten very strong, and maybe if it worked a little more, it could even defeat the Demon King by itself. The slime said it would be fine with doing that, and now, since it could even show off its muscles, for the moment they were on the 40th floor, which was a safe place. Dungeons have some safe spots where monsters almost never enter. The slime didn't seem to worry about being there, so it seemed it was only the monsters born inside the dungeon that avoided these places. Several noticed Zeta had gotten up and asked if she was already okay, and it seemed so. For now, she started walking. A huge scream echoed through the whole dungeon. Soon she asked what could be happening, and Leon realized that meant only one thing. All the monsters of that dungeon were heading their way. With that many, there were around 300 to 500 monsters coming toward them. The girl panicked and quickly asked how they could escape that situation. And how could the monsters even be entering that place if it was a safe zone? Leon wondered why, but wasn't surprised at all. He knew that irregular monsters didn't care about appearing inside safe zones. She quickly asked if Leon was being serious, and it was really true. There were monsters everywhere. And then she started laughing, saying 500 monsters wasn't a concern, since she could handle from 1,000 to 10,000. But Leon realized she was losing her mind, and quickly used magic to make her sleep, and asked the slime to protect her. Obviously, the point was to let her sleep in a safer spot, but it was already too late now. Carefully watching the monsters, Leon realized it was time to use magic, so he once again used his sandstorm with Reflect activated twice. In his past life, he had defeated them all, and even faced bigger armies. It was said he had managed to defeat over 10,000 monsters, controlled by a commander of the Demon King's army. It had been a very heavy battle since he was protecting the city at the same time. Compared to that, this wasn't even a big job. Soon after, she woke up and stood up asking what had happened. Leon said she had fainted for a while, and that in truth it was a big problem. And maybe Leon thought she was really tired, even if it wasn't very normal. But soon she had seen something terrible, though it probably wasn't necessary to remember that. So they decided to move on. Leon noticed that the calmer she stayed, the better, so they should head back to the surface. Giving her that kind of condition, they thought they shouldn't stay there much longer. Then the ground started breaking. And maybe that was the reason behind all those hordes, Leon observed carefully, watching the miasma coming out. And then Zeta said it wasn't possible that this kind of thing would happen. That floor was collapsing, then the ground broke and they fell. Leon managed to land calmly. And right after that, Zeta fell into his arms and froze, quickly looking away, then decided to look around to check what was happening. And it seemed they had fallen under the safe zone. While looking to the side, they realized something was happening there. Zeta looked and turned pale, staring at that huge tail. It was a dragon they had found, the poison dragon, Fafnir. Leon understood the situation and remembered his past life. That dungeon had been located right where he destroyed the dragon in his past life. So somehow he would have to face it again, and it seemed it had even survived. So that dragon was the dungeon master. Then Leon looked back, asking if the girl was all right, but she was lost, wondering why the boss was even there. And on top of that, it was a very famous poison dragon, a monster of high disaster level standing in front of them. There was no way to avoid that situation, so she started losing her mind more, and it was time for another sleep spell, and Leon did the same thing as before. Then he turned and stared at the dragon, saying that it had been 100 years since they last met, but for Leon it felt like he had only defeated the dragon a few months ago. The dragon stared constantly at the protagonist, saying there was no way to mistake it, that he could be exactly the same hero who defeated it in the past life, and it seemed Leon understood he was being recognized by the power around him, so there was no way to deny the difference. More than that, the dragon said it would end Leon, and that this time he would lose his life. And then the protagonist wondered if back then they weren't on better speaking terms, since now the dragon was only screaming for his death, and after one attack, Leon dodged, apologizing, but said he would have to finish it again, and would make sure to erase it from existence. At that moment, Leon punched the dragon with great force, and then stepped back from the attack to observe, but the dragon got up and launched another attack, which Leon dodged. Maybe the protagonist realized he could win just with his fists, so he decided to use some magic and cast the ice rain, which hit the dragon completely. But looking carefully, it hadn't worked. The dragon roared that such things didn't work at all, and decided to use dragon's breath. Leon then carefully looked forward and dodged that attack with another spell. Right after, Leon touched his chest, using the enchantment of complete poison resistance. But then he wondered what was happening there. The dragon wasn't feeling pain, and soon the dragon said it had already prepared the perfect scenario. Since no attack could harm it, then Leon realized exactly what was happening at that moment. The dragon had become an undead, and undead monsters can keep moving with their own arms and legs, in some cases even without their own heads. High-ranked undead monsters can even regenerate over time. And it seemed like a good idea for Leon. The dragon had become dumb, and it was a surprise it had revealed its weakness so easily. The dragon didn't understand, and soon Leon used the power of holy punishment. The dragon simply began fading away, asking how Leon had that kind of power. Then, after fading completely, Leon looked carefully at his hand and threw the rest of the dragon's ashes into the air, asking for it to rest well this time. Then, returning to the city, Zeta had fallen asleep in her own bed, and after a little while, she woke up startled by everything that had happened, wondering when she had fallen asleep in her own bed, and maybe she had the strangest dream, but one that felt very real, and without a doubt, even if it was just a dream. It was still strange. Soon after, she opened one of the doors to check her storage, and then widened her eyes in fear of what was in front of her. All the ores they had gathered in her dream were there, so it was true. Then she decided to look at the note left by Leon, where he asked to use that to forge his sword, and that he wanted to always pay the highest price. Then she remembered everything. Believing that it hadn't been a dream, after some time Leon came to get the sword, saying it wasn't bad. Then he decided to add some improvements to the sword to check, and that left Zeta completely lost, wondering how he was doing that kind of thing, and what he had done with the sword, since it was glowing more than usual. In truth, he had just enchanted it, a bit of attack power for all elements, self-repair, the ability to make the sword indestructible, and also a lot of protection. But that was a holy sword, at the level even of a national treasure or something like that, but Leon thought it was still very far from a real sword in his opinion. Leaving that aside, he wondered how long it lasted and how much it would cost, but the woman ignored it, saying she didn't need the protagonist's money. Leon asked why. In truth, they would have a lot of work thinking about that, and soon asked Leon if he knew how much those ores he had brought actually cost. And anyway, they heard that the northern dungeon had been conquered. Then Leon explained he had defeated the boss, and she was shocked, wondering if that really hadn't been a dream. So she thought there wouldn't be many adventurers coming to that city from now on, and once the dungeon boss was defeated, all the monsters inside the dungeon became weaker. The dungeon began collapsing. With that, adventurers started moving their locations, then began heading to other places, and the demand for blacksmiths also dropped, and it was something that happened. Anyway, she asked Leon who in the world he was, since with that power, she could even see Leon facing the legendary great hero head-on, and soon she really believed he had reincarnated as him. Leon was left speechless, not knowing what to say, and she wondered if it was really true, if he really wasn't the great hero, but he said no, so Zeta ended up giving up. And soon elsewhere at the mission board, people noticed someone had defeated the northern dungeon, and it seemed they hadn't shown up to claim the glory. They thought it was a senior adventurer who was around. And it could also have been a group liberating a distant city, but they heard that some women were coming to the city, and maybe they had done that kind of thing. The same adventurers who had helped the protagonist reach the city with the carriage looked carefully at that, linking the whole situation with the protagonist, realizing that he was a superhuman who was having an adventure problem, and hearing that he had already been promoted to the next rankings. The two girls who had formed a team with the protagonist also watched closely, obviously saying that it was the protagonist who had done that kind of thing, and both were thinking the same. Meanwhile, Leon leaves the city to continue his adventure. Then, arriving at the Adventurers Guild, the chief slammed the table hard, asking who had faced the dungeon. The dungeons were the great core of money flowing into the Adventurers Guild, because they attracted many adventurers and ended up bringing a lot of money. But not long ago, the northern dungeon had been conquered by someone, and they decided that they would give a reward to whoever conquered it. But the person had not yet been found. None of the adventurers had claimed that feat. At least not anyone who had been recognized by the guild, but that ended up turning into an unaffiliated explorer, which could bring disgrace to the guild. since they had been fighting head-on for those dungeons for years. Soon after, someone knocked on the door. It was one of the receptionists who apologized, but he had just found out in an investigation, and then he asked what was said. In fact, nobody yet knew who had done that, except unless they didn't care, it was still unknown who had conquered it. But it was someone strong enough. But anyway, no matter how long he worried about this person, maybe they wouldn't be able to find him. But the truth was that there was a rumor going around among the adventurers that maybe a certain boy was the conqueror. The leader then wondered how a boy could have done that. And then the receptionist said it was a 1-2-year-old boy who had recently become an adventurer. The chief said that made no sense. How could a 1-2-year-old boy conquer a dungeon? That's why the receptionist said it was just a rumor. During the exam, the boy had apparently defeated a mid-ranking adventurer who was acting as the examiner and reported that he ended up killing many wolves during his first mission. The chief wondered how that kind of thing could have happened. And if that was actually a joke, more than that, the receptionist asked around in front of the dungeons and there was something. And obviously everyone was talking only about the same boy who matched the description of the person who bought a sword there. Anyway, the details were a little confusing, and no one knew for sure what was true and what was not. The chief slammed the table again, ordering them to bring Leon there as quickly as possible. And the receptionist ran after the protagonist to find him, but our hero was walking through the forest, thinking that along the way, he enjoyed the different varieties in the cities. Asura said it seemed fun. Then Leon remembered that there was a city called Melissa that was to the west of the city where he was, and he had heard of it and would head there, but soon he ended up defeating some monsters with his fists. And something caught the protagonist's attention. It was a hole in the wall that had something there. Maybe it could be a person? The hole was very low and deep as well, and Leon felt that there was no monster there, but that there was an energy that was extremely weak. The slime decided to move forward to check what it was, and Leon asked him to be careful. While Asura advanced, Leon followed behind to see what it was, and soon after he noticed that the slime got startled, saying it wasn't bad, and Leon asked if there was anyone. When he looked closely, there were 2 people there who seemed to be Arcus. One of them was extremely angry, protecting the other child. Leon looked closely at that, and upon seeing the girl who was passed out, Leon said that there was no need for worry, and that the slime was a companion, but the child didn't lower his guard, in fact. He became even angrier. Soon Leon said that he was going to help the child and asked the other one to step aside, but he immediately said no. But Leon ended up having no choice, so he asked Asura to do what she had to do, and soon after Asura threw herself in front of the child and tied him up, Leon began to approach the child who was lying on the ground, and touched her head, saying that the child no longer had life. The other one who had been tied up lost his composure and began to scream, but soon Leon asked him not to worry anymore, because since that child had lost her life so recently, there was still a chance of being able to bring her back. So he placed his hand on the child's hair and used his resurrection magic, and the soul returned to the body, and little by little all the bleeding and wounds were healed until the process was finished. The tied-up child stayed quiet, and soon Leon asked how she was, since all the injuries were now fine. Then he decided to approach the other child to use healing magic as well, and little by little all the wounds were healed. The child looked carefully at his body, not understanding what had happened. There were still some wounds that should be healed. Since there was still some strength left for them, he soon thought it would be better to just rest. So Leon used sleep magic on both, and left them there sleeping. Since they should be siblings, Leon would end up giving them some assistance, so he helped a little to improve the skills of the 2 children, while it wasn't surprising for this kind of monster. Their physical abilities were immense, considering they were just children and should have been living in that forest alone. Soon the man wondered why they were there, but soon after, the child who had been resurrected woke up and stood up, looking closely at Leon and getting angry. Soon he said that there was no need to keep his guard up, and that he was the one who saved her, and then the child warned the other who was sleeping to wake up, and the 2 became completely angry, but Leon ended up having an idea. In his past life, there was a famous clown in the city who could make people smile no matter who they were. Little by little, he would appear surrounded by a large crowd. Children in particular always loved the clown, and just because of that, Leon ended up doing something funny to make them smile. Then he looked carefully at them, asking them to pay a little attention to the angry face he was going to make, but that didn't make them laugh, in fact. They froze looking at the protagonist, who then stood up and began to dance. The children held back their laughter, and he said just a little, then he could do some more funny things. The children started laughing, and both, after laughing for a long time, decided to eat a little of what the protagonist was making at that moment. Leon gave them a soup of vegetables and meat, which made their mouths water. Leon explained that he hadn't poisoned the food and that they could eat it without worry, and that's what the two did. They prepared themselves and started eating, and soon they found it delicious. After finishing a whole plate, Leon asked if they wanted more, and so it was. Then he introduced himself as an adventurer, and in exchange for the soup he made, he asked why children like them were in that place. Then they looked at each other and began to explain their story. They were siblings, but practically like twins, and they also didn't know what their parents looked like. And it seemed they had been slaves for so long that they couldn't even remember anymore, besides all the physical ability of those demi-humans. They had been exploited by laboratories, and just one day, when they were being transported through the forest, a strong monster ended up attacking their carriage. So, while the other people were being killed, they ran to live their own lives. But it had been a bit tough. The children were confused. Anyway, they were covered in wounds, and possibly they had been mistreated by other people too. So Leon stood up, saying that even though they had strength, they could leave that place, and that they didn't need to worry. The monsters in the forest were nothing to them. So Leon would protect the children with everything he had. After a while, he encountered a monster coming out of the cave, and the two ran back to the cave. But Leon told them not to worry, and it was just to see the situation. The slime alone was able to defeat the monster, and that caught the children's attention, who were happy to see that the slime was very strong. So Leon ended up carrying the two in his arms and would take them back to the path, saying that normally they walked, but since he had a speed power, he began to run very fast, running with them there. The children realized he was very fast, and then they encountered another monster, but Leon quickly defeated it. The children were happy to see all of this. Meanwhile, as they ran through the forest, Leon ended up encountering someone along the way. The man was startled and realized it was just children, but looked closely and saw the children who were with the protagonist, saying that they were alive now and asked how they could be running on their own if he had any idea of the trouble they had caused. The children hid behind the protagonist. Leon realized that this merchant was their master. He was left speechless, but the merchant demanded that the children appear there now. Seeing the children's condition, Leon gave him an angry look. Realizing that it wasn't good at all for the master, the children ended up getting scared and moved forward to go toward the merchant, but Leon held them back. The man asked what they were doing, since they were his slaves that he should deliver now, so they asked what the man was going to do with them. He would punish them obviously for having lost composure and done that kind of thing that shouldn't have been done. And soon Leon asked who gave him the right to do that kind of thing. The man said there was no right, because in fact he was the master, so he could choose how to treat his own slaves. Soon after, the children got scared, and Leon gave another angry look, saying if he was the master, then he should look carefully to see if there was any proof of it. Obviously, the master had it. There was a contract between the two, which was a mark that existed on their arms, but when he pointed at the children, they showed their arms and became confused when they saw that the mark had already disappeared a long time ago. The master was lost, asking how that kind of thing had happened. Then Leon said there was no mark there, so he had no right to punish the children, since they were nothing of his. The master said that everything was mistaken, and that he was really sure that those two were his property, but Leon again said that he had no proof of it, and carefully Leon's hand moved, because in fact it would be explained what he had done now. He had secretly removed the marks with his hand and mastered the thief's job. So he could do that kind of thing easily, but it was a crime that normally would not be used. Soon Leon explained that those two were with him, and the man says no, and it is the green one. Leon went at him in that way, ends up grabbing his whip to throw it with all his strength at the protagonist. However, Leon easily grabs the tip of the whip. The man says it was impossible, and Leon quickly replies that he would end it right away. The man ends up seeing nothing and just faints. Then Leon says they should move on. Arriving at the city, the guard notices there were children traveling alone, so he asks what was happening. Leon introduces himself as an adventurer, and says the child was already an adventurer of letter D rank, so the guard says he could be welcomed. Freed. Leon gets confused, asking if the name of the city wasn't Melissa. But the guard says that a long time ago the name of the city was changed. The city today was named in honor of the great hero. They gave it the surname of the great hero, the one who had saved everyone during an invasion by the Demon King's army 100 years ago. The city was named in honor of the protagonist. Leon obviously never thought he would have a city named after him for what he had done. But continuing on his adventure, Leon and the children entered the city, and after a long time walking, the children were upset because there were too many people around, and soon Leon looks at them, asking what they will do now. They don't know, but Leon explains they are no longer slaves and are free, They don't really understand it well. And Leon thinks he understood clearly what was happening, that maybe he should leave them in an orphanage. The children ask if they couldn't stay with Leon. He is left without reaction, because it would be difficult for an adventurer to take children with him. And the two say they would do anything. Even Sura asks if they couldn't go together. So, maybe he should place them as beasts to accompany him by power. But after doing so, Leon realizes something. They only became his friends through the system, and that wasn't possible. A companion beast is a monster used by a tamer. In other words, only monsters could become that. Except there was one thing. Leon decides again to look at their statuses, realizing that they really were his companions and had already turned, which means he could take them on an adventure without any problem. So, Leon says it was fine. If they insisted that much, maybe he should give them what they wanted. The children get excited and decide to hug Leon, since they really like the protagonist a lot. Next, they are taken to an inn, where they bathe, as Leon helps them clean themselves. After bathing, drying their hair and finding new clothes, now it was very difficult to recognize them, so obviously they could be taken on an adventure. Abruptly, Leon notices something and asks what their names are, but the two don't have any names, which is quite convenient. So, Leon decides to give them names. He names the girl Iris and the boy Aruk. They look at each other and call each other, liking the names. They get excited. Thus, time passes, and after some time, they were playing. So Leon decides to say it was time for dinner. After preparing a large, huge dish, they end up standing still without eating. Leon asks what happened, and if there was something they didn't like. The children look carefully at the protagonist, asking if they could eat, and Leon says it was true, that everything was fine. Then, the children devour that dish entirely, which even scares the maids around. After eating, the two end up going to sleep, and Leon thinks that he gave them everything they wanted, but he should also give them some basic training. After taking them to adventure, maybe he should take them outside the next day. But anyway, it was a city named after the protagonist's surname from his past life, and he saw those bronze statues everywhere, but never thought such a thing would be taken so far. That was a strange feeling for Leon, and soon the statue was in the city center. A woman looked carefully at that city, and her group ended up attracting attention. The name of that woman was Hetty, and she says it was fine and that for now they could leave. Soon after, they go to the forest, and the children end up getting scared, because the protagonist asked them to try fighting head-on with a huge monster. But they were very afraid at that moment, so Leon tells them not to worry. That kind of monster isn't strong overall, and both could be skillful in fighting them. They are, in fact, a higher class than the monster there, adventurers who couldn't make it in the modern day. So, Leon asks the children to strike that monster with all the strength they had. Then he unties the monster and hits it hard so it would rush at the children. After the monster starts to thrash, Iris ends up getting angry. Then Aruk doesn't manage much, but at that moment, the two prepare to kick the monster, which ends up flying a distance. Right after, Leon ends up grabbing a dragon and does the same, kicks the dragon with all his might, and the dragon rushes at the two. It was kind of heavy training, and Leon just slowly observed. After 3 days, it seemed they managed to deal with combat. Now it was time to visit the guild. Going to the Adventurers Guild of the city, they entered with everything, but it was very impressive. The receptionist notices the presence of children there and asks what they were doing. So, Leon presents his adventurer card, and the receptionist is shocked to realize he is a rank D adventurer, that there was no mistake, because it was real indeed, and also those two children become adventurers as well. He asks when the next exam is. The receptionist looks carefully at the children and says it would be a little difficult. He asks why, and she explains that to become an adventurer, one should at least be old enough to communicate with clients, and such young people entering a group, the qualification would be judged based on what they do. And at the children's age, it would be hard for them to enter as adventurers. Leon realizes this and says maybe he should hold them back from registering, then decides to go to the mission board, where Leon would pick a mission. Checking each one, he decides to pick a specific mission, which was an investigation in the Regina area, where a number of monsters had been reported around a village, and the reward was 3 gold coins. Leon realizes Regina was a city 30 kilometers away, and that maybe it would take half an hour running and another half hour doing something else. Soon, a man ends up asking the protagonist what a child like him was doing in that place, and looks irritated at the protagonist. Leon explains that he is an adventurer, and the man doesn't understand what was happening, then asks about the 2 children there. Leon explains that they are not adventurers, and the man starts laughing, asking why children like him would be becoming adventurers, And if he is an idiot or something like that? At this point, then a man asks for the mission Leon picked, because he had his eyes on that mission there. And at that moment, the slime charges forward and slams hard into the man's hand, hurting him badly. The slime asks if it could kill the man, but Leon says no. The protagonist apologizes, saying his slime has the habit of hitting adventurers hard. The man asks what that thing was, then decides to draw his sword, saying that the rule is that a companion beast must not hurt a human. Right then, Leon starts to get irritated, because he couldn't agree with that. They were going the wrong way, and since he was someone who would reach so kindly in that way. A receptionist approaches, telling them not to fight, because that would cause many problems for the guild. But the adventurer tells him to shut up, because he is a mid-ranked adventurer and shouldn't act at that moment. Soon, a woman approaches and asks what that man was doing, and then the man looks back, realizing who she was. He ends up paralyzed. The woman asks to explain what was happening, and the receptionist explains. So, understanding the situation, she says that, in other words, in an attempt to steal the child's mission, the man ended up starting a fight with him and would attack his companion beast. The man confirms that it was all true, then he leaves apologizing, and the woman is left puzzled. At that moment, she asks the child if he is fine, and he says yes. Then, he asks if her name is Henriette, and now he smiles, saying that just saying it could make the young lady calm down, that everything was fine. Leon thought she was some kind of celebrity, but in fact, she was just an adventurer for a while. Another woman approaches, saying that it was shameful, that as a high-ranked adventurer, she was still just an adventurer, and that the manners were ruining them at that moment. Henriette asks her to stop, that she didn't want to say such a thing, and soon the mysterious woman carefully looks at the protagonist, saying that she understands, and that the handsome boy is simply her type. While drooling, she asks if he wanted to play with Big Sis, that there was something that really seemed good. But Henriette slaps her hard on the head, saying she couldn't do such a thing, behaving like that with a child. So, she apologizes, but Henriette refuses to accept, saying that if she doesn't take care of herself like that, treating pretty girls that way would make her be treated like a criminal. But soon the woman says not to worry, that there's nothing to consider. Henriette ends up readying her sword, saying she wanted to decapitate her with just one case, but soon she was joking. Another woman arrives right behind, telling the two to stop that situation, and that the stars were in those two children. She was a woman with no reaction at all, and soon another strange woman appeared to Leon. The mysterious woman who appeared ends up losing her composure, saying she had already prepared everything, and that heaven really exists. Then, she asks the two children if they want to play with Big Sis, while she takes something out of her pocket, which was candy, but obviously they refuse. Even so, Henriette says she was scaring everyone, and soon apologizes for what happened. Those women are part of the group, so she introduces the Big Sis who hit on the protagonist, Kane, and the other is Tina. Leon ends up introducing himself, and also introduces Arik and Iris, and also introduces Sura. Kane says he was funny, like a beast tamer, and that slime was extraordinary. Her view seems like it's just some ordinary slime, but anyway, she apologizes for what happened, and also apologizes for the adventurer who showed up, saying that he was in a bad mood, since he had just failed the promotion exam and ended up acknowledging he was eliminated in the application stage, which means that he was in a really bad mood and ended up taking everything out on the protagonist. Kane continues saying that he was a small man who almost looked like a child, and because of their lack of skill, that kind of thing would happen. Soon, Henriette asks the protagonist what kind of mission he was planning to take. At that moment, after presenting it, the women look closely and say that this mission was somewhat problematic and that it would be delivered to Regina at that moment. That had been posted 3 weeks ago, and supposedly no one had accepted it yet. So, even though they knew it was a mid-rank mission, and that they couldn't handle the situation of seeing a child taking it, they asked the protagonist what rank he was, and soon he said he was ranked letter D, and all of them became completely lost when they saw that he was actually very strong. Even with a mission being recommended for the mid-rank, there were still no offenses, but they thought it would be better to take something else. But the protagonist insists. He says he wants to take that mission no matter what, and that no one would make him give up. However, the client must have been confused at that moment. Kane ends up becoming completely lost, and soon Henriette has an idea that he shouldn't do everything alone, and asks Leon what he thinks. At that moment, obviously, the protagonist is left without a reaction, and the two women think that it was a good idea, especially Tina, who ends up saying that she had no intention of doing anything with the other two children. Soon, Leon ends up thinking that these children are back. He realizes that it won't be quick to run, and the children also seem like they don't like that kind of thing. But Leon says that it was all right, and that he feels a little bad asking for help. Henriette says that it was fine, that he didn't need to worry, and that they were just making a bit of fun. But anyway, he is a low-rank adventurer, and obviously she gets worried about the protagonist traveling with 2 children, which shouldn't be easy. She is certain that something about it should be concerning. It had already been a few days since Leon, Aruk, and Iris walked around there, and also met them, and obviously they say they are not going there for the reward. Leon realizes that, if he refuses, the women would just follow him, and honestly, he has no idea what kind of thing could happen with those 2 women, following them around everywhere. Soon, Henriette says that Regina, even though it's a small town, is still really well known for the hot baths they have, and even though they've been busy lately, it was still a great chance for them to have one less job. Kane says that was true, while Tina's eyes shine. Kane says that it would really be funny to play at that moment, while Tina says that she would have many games to play with those children. Henriette tells them to stop that kind of joke, and obviously Leon understands the inner reason they have. Right after, Henriette ends up taking a carriage to take them at that moment, and Leon notices something strange. There was a unicorn there. Henrietta ends up introducing the unicorn, saying that it is very powerful, and with that carriage, she believes they will reach Regina in about an hour. Kane ends up liking the idea of staying inside somewhere with a handsome boy in a carriage, while Tina looks closely at the children, and it was inevitable that she would do something with them during the trip. And soon Henriette says they will sit right at the back. Then, the carriage moves, and when they arrive at the city, Leon notices that the stories weren't lying about the city being very small. Once there, they decide to talk directly with the town chief, who gets scared to see Henriette in that place and says that they weren't supposed to say they were taking the next missions. He can clearly see that it was just a small village that had nothing but nice hot springs, and that they were not proper adventurers for that, since they were too strong. But in fact, the woman says that currently they are accompanying the protagonist during a break, and that there's no concern if it's just to compensate him. The village chief understands, and soon the protagonist introduces himself and says that it was him who accepted the mission, and asks if he could give the details of what was happening. The village chief says that recently monsters have been appearing more frequently in that area, monsters that live in the forest a little distant from there, but that were really starting to appear around the city. The old man would like them to check what was happening and what kind of thing could have brought that behavior there. Henriette ends up saying that she understands, that it really seems like something is happening in the forest. The old man says that it was a somewhat difficult mission and that they should do their best. Then, everyone goes down to walk in the forest and check what was happening. Henriette looks at the sky and says that something was strange, that it seemed difficult to find the cause in such a massive forest. But Tina says not to worry about that, and that she has a class that was of the air, a type of hunter whose abilities end up being about finding enemies and exploring in general. Except she uses the excuse saying she's also that good at observing other people too, and that she's also good at finding monsters, and that normally she would do her best for this kind of thing. Henriette ends up finding the path, and soon looks back, asking if Leon and the children were going to be fine, and that they should have left everyone in the village. But Leon says that everyone will be fine, as much as they may seem like just children. In truth, they are not normal, they are actually very strong. Soon, she asks if Leon isn't just a calm child. After walking a little through the forest, Henriette says that it was bizarre what was happening there, and the women agree that they've already been walking in the forest for a while and still haven't found any monster. Tina, looking closely, asks if everything was all right and that she still had no sense of any monster around them. Henriette realizes that it was calm and that there was really something strange there. Even using skill, nothing was detected. So, maybe it's not something that happens all the time. Maybe if they manage to pull some monsters with a whistle. Leon ends up whistling to all sides, and that catches his attention for some reason. He asks them to be careful, because the monster was coming from their south. But when the women look back, Tina realizes that she can't see anything. But soon after, she notices something, and that it was true, that the monster was coming from the south. The others become completely confused, and how come Leon ended up detecting it before Tina? But Henriette asks them to forget about it, and just focus on the monster, and everyone should be on guard, because they were huge monsters. When they arrived, it was a giant tarantula that was there. Soon, Henrietta steps forward, saying that she wanted to fight alone, but Kane wouldn't allow that kind of thing, so she ends up creating a wall barrier. Henriette asks Leon to step back and that she would deal with that monster, then ends up giving a very strong attack, which ends up being defended by the tarantula's leg. Then, Leon ends up giving a warning that there were more monsters coming, and that they were smaller this time. Tina ends up feeling uneasy when she realizes that he was perceiving monsters completely differently than Leon. But without a doubt, she begins to have a better sense of what was happening, and there were many monsters, and that seemed bad. Henriette says she knows, and her sword was stuck, starting to shake. Then they start being surrounded by monsters, and soon Tina seems like she would have to fight, but Kane ends up preparing her magic. While all the women are struggling, Leon just observes. Then they start fighting one by one, but at that moment a small spider appears behind Kane. But she is protected by the protagonist's slime, who asks if she is okay. The woman ends up thanking, and Leon just observes. Soon after, he looks at the children, telling them to just wait at that moment. And so, Henriette calls the protagonist's attention along with Kane, who asks what he was doing at that moment. Then, Leon draws his sword and cuts all the legs of those small spiders, which ends up scaring the women at that time. And so, he cuts again and again, and keeps doing it many, many times against the little spiders. The larger spider ends up charging at Leon, but Henriette wouldn't allow that to happen. However, until she releases, it is very large, and Leon just cuts it as if it were nothing, and at that moment he slices the spider in half. And so, he ends up crouching, and the women end up startled, asking if that was a dream. Kane asks if Leon's sword was stronger, and she says no, because even then she can't understand the situation. Kane and Tina ask if they are joking, and right when they regain their posture, asking if Leon was really a beast tamer, he also manages to use swords a little. Henriette ends up realizing about the children Leon brought, and ends up having problems, and so they are thrown with all force against a spider. But the two children end up kicking the spider straight into the wall, and end up finishing off that small spider's life. At that moment, all the women start wondering what was happening, that this should only be a dream, and that the children were way too strong. Leon ends up noticing something that catches his attention inside the forest, and it seems there was a boss there, an even bigger tarantula that was coming from inside the forest. The women get scared, asking if that was possible. It was a queen tarantula. The queen, as soon as she appeared, was a disaster-level monster. They didn't know what to do at that moment, and recommend dealing with the situation carefully. And now, they tell the protagonist that he should run, but at that moment, the queen ends up wrapping everyone in web. Henriette tries to cut the webs at once, but she is thrown back with full force by the elasticity. And at that moment, Kane also tries to burn, but can't do anything. Tina also tries to do something, but soon she is trapped in the web and is taken by the spider, saying that it was too tragic, and that at least she wanted to go with the children to a bath. But obviously, that is not accepted by the girls. When the spider begins to pull, Kane tries to do something, but at that moment her attack ends up being dodged. Then Leon takes advantage, using the lightning ability he has, burning the spider with everything. That ends up scaring everyone around them, and so the spider begins to be burned. Tina is dropped to the ground, and when the spider tries to get up, it can't properly. Tina ends up saying to Kane that it was she who saved her, but can't understand what kind of ability she was using. But the woman says no, because she can't use that kind of ability. Then they all look closely at Leon, realizing it was him, and he says that he can also use a little magic. After a while, they manage to defeat the queen, and soon they begin to understand that there are many things about Leon that nobody understood, and that they only began to realize when they went on an adventure. Leon was talking with the children, since he was giving them good work, and they just stayed there observing. At that moment, it touched the hearts of the two women, saying that it was something precious. But then, Henriette ended up realizing that there was something strange at that time, that it was the light tarantula queen who was causing all that turbulence in the forest. And because of that, several spiders were appearing. The monsters began to get frightened, and so they started to leave the forest and go into the woods, and even into the village. Everyone thought that was the reason, in addition to the lack of monsters in the forest, but in fact it didn't happen because of other common problems, but rather because all of them were being eaten by the spiders. Left with this knowledge, the monsters began to flee with everything they had in the forest, and eventually started attacking humans. And it would all begin in Regina, which was a village near the forest, and there was no doubt that it would be the first target. Henriette realized all this and said that there was nothing else they could do. But Leon ended up thinking that he should exterminate all the spiders in that case. So he gave a huge whistle, which ended up scaring everyone, asking what kind of noise that was. He said it was just a whistle he could make to pull the monsters toward them. And soon Kane realized that it was exactly the same thing that brought the spiders on them. Henriette said that the whistle was very loud, and that maybe it was an area Leon should cover. But the protagonist said that, in fact, he covered the entire forest. After that, Henriette and the group couldn't handle the situation, so they were attacked by all kinds of monsters in the forest. They decided to explain to the village chief what was happening. He was very happy that they managed to deal with the whole situation and knew that the group led by Henrietta would take care of all of it. But the woman said that they should just watch the situation. They said they were just helpers. The village chief started laughing, thinking it was a joke. Henriette said that, in fact, it was no joke at all, and that even though they killed almost all the monsters in the forest, they still hadn't managed to deal with the whole problem for good. Then the village chief ended up saying that he would give them as a gift the best bath they could have in that village, and that the entire inn was reserved just for them, that they should relax and be careful with the hot water. So Leon went in with everything, and the women started preparing their clothes. Both the slimes and the children didn't understand what that thing they were going to was. Then Leon decided to explain, telling them not to worry. Kane went in front, telling Leon not to worry, and to come with her to the women's bath. But he said he was a man. She told him to forget that kind of thing and just go in, that they could get to know each other better that way, and that they would also be naked, and that he didn't need to worry about anything. But Leon ended up worrying. Tina asked Kane to forget that kind of thing, and that the boy was already very mature, and that nothing would change with that kind of thing. However, the children were calm. Small girls are calm. They went into the women's bath, and there was nothing compared to the women. Soon, if Leon was going into the men's bath, then everyone would go there together. Tina ended up forgetting about that, so she had no other choice, and at least the girls should go with her. Henrietta was angry right behind and ended up sighing, asking the two to stop that as soon as possible. So they went to bathe. Leon ended up going with the children and the slime, saying that it was already calm enough, and the children managed to swim peacefully, since it was a very large place. That was the men's bath, but he shouted no when the women tried to come in. So at least Iris went with them. Nando should have stopped them at that moment. They should have been calmed by the hot bath, since there were no visitors. But someone ended up going in there, and Leon was startled. It was Tina and Kane who had entered that place, saying that it was big and the place was very peaceful. Leon ended up with no reaction at all to what was happening in front of him, saying that that was the men's bath, even though she realized that everything had still been reserved for them, so it was no problem if she went into the men's bath. But soon he turned his face away, and she started laughing, approaching Leon, saying that things were going to get better. But soon the protagonist created a barrier around him that forbade anyone from touching him. Obviously, she couldn't even get close, and Leon ended up hiding in the water, playing alone. In the middle of that, Tina was there, seeing the water full of fluids from the children. Henriette entered the bath too, and soon after the women asked why she was there, since she had tried to stop them at that moment, and if maybe she also couldn't resist Leon at that moment. Tina asked if she wanted to see the children, but she said no, that she was so lonely that she didn't want to stay like that forever. And at that moment they looked back, seeing that Leon and the children had disappeared, and they had escaped. Henriette realized that those friends were going to create some problem in life. Then, in the women's bath, Leon and the children were there calmly and quietly. At that moment, they went back to the Adventurers Guild, realizing that Leon was a heartless person, since he left them in that place. Tina wanted to have fun with the children. Henriette said that they had been left behind, obviously because of the two. But when they arrived at the receptionist drew their attention as soon as possible, since she heard everything that happened in Regina, and it seemed like it was a very complicated situation, and she couldn't believe that a tarantula queen had appeared in the forest. Henriette thanked her for the concern, and because they were there to help, but it wasn't necessary to worry, because they couldn't have done it without one person, a boy who was a promising future. They looked at each other and the receptionist asked what had happened. Then, the receptionist said that the idea was obviously to give them a specialty because of that kind of thing. Kane asked something, if they were planning to give Leon the same thing. She said that at present, it was just that the mission had been chosen to be very dangerous, more than stated, and they ended up increasing the reward. While they were there, Tina said that it wasn't necessary to worry, and it was a good thing since they appeared. Then she explained that that case was completely done entirely by Leon alone. The receptionist was paralyzed, and soon Henrietta said that she had heard that there were a bunch of giant tarantulas there, and a tarantula queen, but at least one small tarantula had been completely dealt with by Leon, and that he was the one who defeated all the tarantulas, and even the tarantula queen. The receptionist turned pale at that, and asked if they were joking, but it wasn't a joke at all, which put Kane in danger. Henriette wasn't the type of person who would lie about that kind of thing, just to raise another person's level. So maybe that must be true. Henrietta explained that the reward should all be given to Leon, and that he did everything alone, and in addition recommended that they simply promote him to the highest rank, because it was very difficult for him to leave that rank at that moment. The receptionist sat down and kept thinking that they deliberately gave all the rewards to the boy, but it wasn't that. If that were the case, she would simply refuse, and still wouldn't tell all those exaggerations about the boy's abilities. In fact, it meant that he really took down the Tarantula Queen on his own. Or maybe he was just 10 years old. That boy was a topic among all the receptionists. Not only was he a rank D adventurer at his age, he was also handsome, and all those who dealt with him kept saying that he was a very strong person, and he also gave a fresh air to the reception. Besides that, he never caused problems as an adventurer, and when Henriette was in his group, she ended up thinking that it was something dangerous. The receptionist was aware of the rumors circulating around him. Also, when he grows up, he will have a very great aura of nobility, but that wasn't what she should be fantasizing about at that moment. She would report everything to her superiors at that moment, and wanted to cause a good headache and hear all of it. Anyway, she doubted that Henriette would be lying about everything she said, and didn't think they should just believe it, and that maybe she should tell and see what would happen, because Leon really might be capable of everything that was said. After that, Leon took many missions to deal with goblins, collect herbs, find work, since those missions were meant for low-ranking adventurers. I think it would be difficult to see his true strength, but initially they exaggerated a lot about the rewards he got, and he ended up hunting down all the goblins in that place. The receptionist screamed, saying that it was an incident that couldn't happen. Besides that, it seemed that there were some much higher ranks than just any monsters. Around there was also a goblin king, who, as powerful and intelligent as he is among normal goblins, requires combined strength with several parties of adventurers to deal with them. In the future, only one appeared, which was already too complicated. Besides that, none of the monsters had many injuries, and they could all be sold smoothly. Soon, she wondered if Leon really was a beast tamer. Next time, he brought herbs, and not just one, but thousands of them, maybe even much more. Leon simply took as many as was possible, and for no reason at all, just those that existed were also high-quality herbs, which were primarily needed to prepare high-quality potions. They are much more difficult to obtain than normal herbs. Besides that, a smart adventurer would take many days to collect just one. However, he accepted that mission simply that same morning, and by the end of the day ended up bringing all of that in one day. Soon, she didn't understand how he got all of that. After a while, Leon also brought a bunch of bandits and an artifact that had been stolen by them. Initially, he killed all the bandits. Leon calmed everything down as an incident that drove the receptionist crazy, and soon she explained that he had to beat all the bandits to get the artifact back. The Bad House was a group of bandits that was dangerous enough, being recognized all over the world. Recently, there were many rumors that they expanded all their influences in the areas, but they were caught simply with ease. Soon, she looked closely at one of them, who was the boss, an executive of that group, who were former adventurers who could no longer be, and he was very strong. Also, soon Leon managed to fight against everyone in the same group. The executive of those bandits said that the protagonist was a monster, and that was all true. Leon was in the city, walking around with his slime, and asked what was going on. The slime wasn't feeling well, and soon Leon realized that he was fine. Earlier, the big questions that were happening. Asura has a small habit of eating insects and small animals, and maybe by accident it must have eaten something bad, or maybe it was sick. But the slime was glowing, and soon Leon got scared, realizing that this was what was different. After glowing for a while, they ended up worried, since they had no idea what was happening. In situations like these, it was easier to ask someone who was knowledgeable about it. And it seemed that beast tamers weren't all that popular, so maybe there weren't many of them around, adventurers with that kind of job, or maybe a member of the Adventurers Guild would know more about it. So, Leon ran to the Adventurers Guild and spoke with the receptionist, saying that he appeared at the exact right time. But Leon asked her to forget about that for the moment, because Sura was in trouble. Out of nowhere, it started glowing, and maybe it was sick or something like that. The receptionist said that maybe it was evolving. Monsters can also evolve, and they need some time for the requirements. At that moment, Leon understood the situation of it evolving, but the thing was that he had killed many monsters in his past life, and he had never seen one evolve before. The receptionist said that it was amazing, and that even though it was just a slime, beast tamers could capture monsters. But evolution was still something very rare. It was proof of how much Leon was getting stronger. And the slime turned red. Its strength was extraordinary. All its stats were incredible. The receptionist was completely shocked, because it was a red slime. They are aggressive and ferocious, extremely so, many times stronger than a normal slime, and even a higher-ranked adventurer would be in danger facing them. The receptionists were frightened, and she asked Leon to be careful about what was happening, since there had been cases of companion beasts that ended up disobeying their leaders after evolving. But Sura ended up saying that it was very strong. Leon asked if it was feeling anything bad, and it said no, then jumped onto Leon's head and stayed calm. The receptionist touched her chest and said it was all right, and everyone felt relieved. Soon after, she said she had something to discuss with Leon, since the guildmaster had said she should talk to Leon the next time he appeared. Leon asked what was going on, and the old man was there just looking at papers. Soon, the guild leader looked carefully at Leon, asking if it was him, and decided to evaluate him closely. To the guild leader, he seemed like just a normal child, but the receptionist said that the things Leon had been doing were incomprehensibly abnormal. The master understood, saying he wasn't sure if it was a good idea to make him a higher-ranked adventurer than this. The receptionist looked terribly worried. Even though Leon had defeated a goblin king, in the end it was still just a goblin. Maybe people had just misunderstood that situation. A goblin king in particular was hard to kill, even for the highest-ranking adventurers, since they needed a full party to defeat one. Kings were impossible to defeat without a group. Even though he was right, it was still a habit to think of a monster being defeated solo. It wasn't strange to doubt that kind of situation. So, he asked the guildmaster how he thought Leon had defeated everything alone. That was all the guildmaster wanted to ask Leon about. Then he asked if he had help from anyone, but Leon said yes. He had help from the slime, and from the 2 children as well. But the guildmaster wasn't talking about that kind of thing. Then, the receptionist said that since the master here couldn't perceive it, it was a red slime. Then, the guildmaster didn't understand what was happening, and obviously he didn't understand that situation. So, she asked how could he even be a guildmaster in the end. Then, he said there was a reason, but it was because he could manage his subordinates very well. And she said that he simply dumped the work onto everyone else. The guildmaster asked if she said something, and obviously it was nothing. Then, the guildmaster asked if Leon was the only one involved in the battles, and if he hadn't had help anywhere else, since he wouldn't get angry if Leon told the truth. Leon said it was simply the truth, and he said honestly, if the receptionist insisted on promoting him to a mid-rank or higher immediately, there was still no way for the guild to allow such a promotion so easily. So, he needed at least a year of experience to move up from a low rank, and even when he reached a B-rank letter, he would still have to meet with the guild itself, and would still need more natural strength. The receptionist could understand what the guildmaster was saying, but promoting him to B rank was so difficult. So, why not place him 1 rank below? He had still managed to defeat a demon leader. He was responsible for exterminating the Queen Tarantula. It was more than enough to justify this kind of thing. But the guildmaster thought carefully about the Queen Tarantula, saying it was a huge suspicion. Then, the receptionist asked if he was saying that Henrietta was just a liar, but obviously he wasn't saying that and began to think deeply. But the receptionist asked him to stop thinking so much about that kind of thing, and said that this ranking was insignificant to the guildmaster. And since he was so indecisive, the guildmaster said that this kind of thing was very reckless. Soon, Leon asked if he could be called back after they had decided this kind of thing. Then, the receptionist carried the protagonist's form back and forth. He ended up being promoted, and would now be able to take on more missions as an adventurer. And knowing Leon, he would keep going with this kind of thing. And having such an indecisive guildmaster, and realizing that promoting him would be the perfect call. So, it was time to evolve Leon much further. So, she would try to do something better. At that moment, Leon was walking around the city, and someone called his attention. It was Henriette and her group, who ended up congratulating him on the promotion he had earned. Kane said that he could have gotten an even higher promotion, but the guildmaster was really a very complicated person to deal with. Then, she asked if they had also called Leon, and Leon ended up feeling indecisive. But Henriette said that she too had been summoned there, along with a crowd of adventurers. Then, one of the receptionists picked up a paper and called everyone's attention. The reason why all those adventurers had been summoned was because they wanted them to accept a mission. The mission was to investigate the recent crime of kidnapping. Liberto was a completely controlled city and rarely had any crime. The organization still maintained some influence over how to carry out kidnappings, which was rare. But anyway, there had still been several successful attempts. The receptionist went on to say that this mission would cover the entire region, and due to the importance of maintaining the safety of the whole city, the guild still demanded high priority in this matter. That was why all the adventurers were summoned. Soon, one of the adventurers raised his hand, and from the looks of it, he had only summoned intermediate and high-ranking adventurers. He still believed that quality was preferable to quantity when it came to an investigation, and maybe asked if they shouldn't also be calling lower-ranked adventurers. The receptionist said that it was a fair observation, but they had also received some missions directed by the king of the region, and they had been given this mission because someone had been reported as one of the victims. Additionally, the adventurers still had to be led into an investigation. But at the present moment, all of them had gone missing. That was why they were restricting the mission to C rank and above. They understood the situation. In fact, one of those men also called the receptionist's attention, saying that if that was the case, then why were Leon and the children there? And Leon ended up wondering if he had seen this man before in his life, and it was the guy from reception who had tried to get rid of his slime. But the receptionist said that Leon was within the necessary ranking. The man ended up furious, saying that Leon's rank had really been increased and that it was still too much to accept, but that the guild's ranking assessments were completely wrong. Kane ended up laughing, saying that she understood the whole situation, since he couldn't be promoted to a higher rank. He ended up putting the entire blame on the guild. The man was completely enraged, and Henriette ended up saying that they shouldn't doubt Leon's abilities because he was worthy of being the rank he was now, and even higher than that. The man said he got it and understood, and that they pressured the guild to promote him, but Henriette said that such a thing wasn't necessary. Then, they ended up staring at each other, and the man pointed at Leon and asked, "What about the kids?" To him, if they were as strong as Leon's rank, the slime asked if Leon wanted it to finish off that guy, but he said it wasn't necessary. Soon, Leon said that those were his beast companions, and that it wasn't strange for a beast tamer to bring his companions along. The man got angry and turned his back, telling Leon that if he ever got in his way, he would end Leon's life. And since that was it, the man left at that moment. The slime still wondered if it should finish off that man, but it wasn't necessary. Then, parties ended up gathering their things, and they were introduced and led into the investigation itself. But there were still some strict orders to report to the guild at least once a day. So, they would probably have to respond in case anything happened from now on. Leon ended up wondering if anyone was acting suspicious at that moment, and when he looked, there was something unusual there. Some men had a sack and were fully armed. At that moment, Leon ended up following them and realized that they were kidnapping a boy. That clothing was wet and had some kind of drug at that moment, so it was someone very skilled. Soon, Leon asked the children to start preparing in case something happened. Even though Leon had Arik and Iris, he still needed to teach them some skills. And being part of it, Arik was still naturally adapted for security. Then, he saw that they ended up throwing the body into the carriage, and the carriage left. Due to the recent kidnapping concerns, all baggage was thoroughly checked before anyone entered or left the city. But judging by that baggage, Leon noticed something strange. The guard simply gave a signal to the man in the carriage, and the carriage went away. Leon, noticing this, said it was strange, so he decided to follow the carriage to see if anything happened. It went into the forest, and Leon went right after it, realizing that they were heading to a castle thrown in the middle of the woods. If what had been mentioned earlier was true, they were being taken somewhere else. So, Leon should report to the guild. Soon after, several adventurers appeared at that place, and the man asked if Leon was sure it was there. But there was no mistake. It was just a matter of going forward, and there it was. But in that place, there was nothing, and the man said it was dangerous to keep following a child. Leon said that there was a concentrated barrier there, and you wouldn't notice it by just observing. One of the mages said he didn't feel any power there, so there was no evidence of construction. Maybe it was an advanced barrier, or something like that. The man kept moving forward, saying that they should stop believing in the nonsense Leon was talking about, and that it was just easy to take some credit for the things that were happening. Then, he moved forward and ended up passing through the barrier. The mages, realizing it was real, ended up panicking, and the man around said that he had been caught by someone and almost took an arrow to the face. Leon said it was no surprise. Someone was bound to alert the enemies. And at that moment, even though they should pass through the barrier, they still needed to check something first. So, Leon used a cyclone that revealed what was happening and the entire structure that was there around them. The mages asked why he hadn't done that before, and how he was using such an advanced magic without a chant. Henriette said there was no time to think about that, then said that all the adventurers should move forward and attack this kind of problem head-on.